今日咧會叫佳同我哋介紹佢本書，佢出嘅新書啦，跟住我就會問幾個相關嘅問題。
Well, the future book is is based upon another book that I wrote probably 6-7 years ago now, called The Origin Speaks, and it takes me and the reader beyond the current understanding of the origin. So it's not so much about what's beyond the origin, but what the origin is going to do next and how it's going to populate structured space as it knows it, and what's beyond structured space. And it's all about that and how that might happen. These days, there isn't a level, I just communicate. So whereas with the traversing the frequencies work, we use a structured approach to get to certain levels. The student eventually will not need a level. They'll just be there wherever they need to, and they won't need to formally go to a level. So when I do this work, I just connect with the origin or the source or any other entities that I need to connect to. But in this particular book, although there's no level that I'm predominantly working on, this is based upon working with event space or different levels of or states of beingness that we exist within, and the states of beingness and space that the origin is working with. So it's not so much a case of working with different frequencies, but working with different parallel conditions that creates the possibility of understanding what's going to happen next in the origin's evolution. It depends. I have a target each week. I like to write over 1,000 words. And I also have a writing day that I tend to use, which is a Monday. But it can spread out over the week depending upon whether I've got other things happening or I'm disturbed in some way. So although it can be 6 hours in one day, even in those 6 hours I can be here and there and here and there, you know, moving backwards and forwards. And quite a lot of the time though, I'm in both places because I type it straight into the computer and then edit it later. There's probably 3 or 4 or 5 levels of editing, but I go through 2 myself. I edit at the end of my weekly target, and I sometimes edit as I'm going through as well. And then later on, when the book is finished, it goes through another editing process. But in between times, there's somebody else who's completely separate from me, edits it from a purely English language perspective, making sure that all the punctuation's in the right place. But in terms of when the information comes to me, it can be subject headings first that I need to work with. So I then get an idea and I write the subject headings down, not specifically in order, but I know what's going to happen next in terms of what I'm going to communicate or communicate with the origin about. And so there's like a high level understanding first. And then as I move into each of the different subjects and the components within the subjects, sometimes there's no words, it's just concepts. And sometimes the concepts are so difficult, it takes some time to permeate through me and to become me, so I can start to think, okay, there's no English for this or there's no other language for this. How can I use a current day example that I would be aware of that would be able to describe it? And so in some instances the information is described to the reader by using examples in today's knowledge and understanding and education. So it comes out that way. But there are times when it's pictures, there are times when it's actual communication, conversational communication, and there's times when it's just a knowingness, as well as the concepts that can come through. But there are times when it's just too much, and I have to sit back and think, okay, let's wait a bit. And then I write a little paragraph of what I think's coming through and leave it, so that it gives me time to rise to that level in terms of being expansive, to allow me to start to work with it, which may be that same day, but it might also be several months later. Yeah, it was more like a dialogue, although there was a number of concepts that were given to me conceptually, visually. But with the dialogues, it was an unexpected book, to be honest. I didn't expect to be able to be in a position so early to communicate with my late wife. And it was interesting because it was slightly easy in some instances, but more difficult in others because of the emotional content link between me and Dan. But because she was using the concepts and the knowledge that I understood previously in previous work as a basis for communicating with me, it was slightly easy. I mean, I could, for example, I could sit there and write 2,000 words very quickly, and sometimes it was 3,000 words, and sometimes it was just 1,000 words. It just depended upon how I felt the information was flowing and how I could work with it. Sometimes when the information flows, it's just you're there. You're just coming through and it's straight into the computer. Sometimes it's trying to understand it. And sometimes if it's a little bit difficult, it takes longer. But in this instance, it was mostly conversational. Well, my agent Leo and I have loosely talked about it as being something we might consider in the future. How far away into the linear timeline that is, it depends upon what the opportunities are, basically. Some other people that I know who are close to me, who read the books, who've done the courses, for example, or people who've come on my journey with me, have mentioned it a number of times. So it's something which is obviously there. It's just when and who the people are who will be involved with it. You know, it's everything has its time and place, and it's being in the flow, it's being in the moment to recognise when that moment is here. And so if we try to push something, it stays away because there's like a bow wave that keeps it away. But if you're just there and you wait for the moment and you're aware of the moment, then it becomes easy. Well, I experienced a bit of it myself because in my early years I was always involved with the understanding that there was more beyond the physical. I mean, right at a very early age, pre-teenage, I was aware there was much more. You know, I think from 4 or 5 I was more aware that there was much more. But I went through a process of having to become more integrated with the physical, to work with the physical, to understand the physical. And so my own connectivity sort of shut down for a bit. I was still interested in metaphysical things, but not to the point of meditating every day or being sort of in the position of reading things all the time. So when I started to become more aware again later, it sort of becomes intuitive. The person who is just starting to become aware will start to realise that they're questioning their environment. They're questioning their reason to be. Human life becomes almost pointless without a higher reason for it being there. And so they start to look for information that will be able to feed a thirst to know more about why they're thinking these questioning thoughts. You know, why am I here? Is it just luck? You know, am I here for 60, 70, 80 years and then I'm gone and there's nothing left? You know, it's scary for people to think that when their body dies, that's it. There's no more of them, and so they look for other reasons to understand. Some of them go towards religion, which is an interesting direction, but full of problems because of the way humankind has manipulated it over the hundreds of years. Some go towards quite extreme ways of being by giving everything up and going and living as a monk or a nun, and some start to look at it from a spiritual perspective, which which has its own problems because, in essence, if they look at some literature or they look at some videos, it can be quite low level, quite kindergarten level, and so they can be pulled into things like believing in angels or unicorns or elves and lots of different sort of low-level spiritual stuff, which is fine because some of these things do exist in higher frequencies. Elves and unicorns and these other animals are from our past when we were frequentially much higher. But it stays there. It's not expansive, and so if they've got luck, they're able to work with information, literature, videos that is more scientific in its understanding, but also can be quite basic as well. So it can lead you into the information quite gently to make you expansive in a slow way. Now, some of the leaders in this field, like Wayne Dyer, Eckhart Tolle, Neil Donald Walsh, of course Dolores Cannon, explain things in a way which is easily digestible, whereas my side is almost like quite high science, yeah, and that's okay because it gives something for everybody. The trick is not to be constrained by the information, to look for the next step upwards, and to know intuitively or feel your gut feeling when, okay, that was okay for the moment, but what's the next part, and work with that. So for the individual who's aspiring to know more, it's important for them to recognise that there's no end to the expansion of knowledge. There's no finish point. The expansion is infinite in real terms, and so to stop is detrimental to them. Having said that, it's worthwhile considering that they need to really work with themselves and go with what feels right for them, because it's okay saying, okay, you have a friend who's read these books and you must read these books, but if it doesn't feel right for them because of the way they understand things, because we're all different, we all have different skill sets in terms of how we understand things, then it doesn't get absorbed. So they have to work in the way that they absorb information and they're educated, because the way they absorb information from an educational perspective normally is the way that they will normally absorb their metaphysical or spiritual information as well. What we really are is a large volume of sentience that occupies another volume of energy, of space. And that large volume of sentience, which is within the multiversal environment, projects a smaller volume of sentience that I'm told to call the smaller aspect, or the aspect, but we can refer to as the soul. And so the soul is like an octopus's arm that comes down from the large octopus head and occupies a vehicle, a body of some sort. It doesn't need to be a human body, it can be any capable body in the physical universe to experience, learn and evolve. And so our higher self is really what we really are, and the soul is a small component of that, which is still attached, but with a really small line of energy that keeps the contact between the two. And so our higher self is what we really are. It's just that we are here, we're a very small part of it. And so our ability to connect is limited because of how small we are in comparison to what we really are, and the low frequencies that we're in, which creates a really reduced communicative wavelength or bandwidth. And so our higher self is really what we are. It's a much larger volume of sentience. And it's that volume of sentience that evolves as a result of what we do. Now, when we move out of this incarnation, we enter back into communion eventually, with that larger volume of sentience, once the information has been assimilated and understood, and the volume of sentience that is the soul has recognized the benefits and the information and the efficiency of what it's achieved here. Now, it can either enter into full communion, becoming totally one with its higher self, or various different levels of partial communion. There's about 6 levels. But eventually we do fully commune when we finished our evolutionary cycle and we re-enter full communion with Source, our Creator. So we have to think of our higher self as being the significantly larger part of ourselves that is still in our normal environment within the multiverse. Actually, we come into this life knowing who we are. But because it's a slow frequency, and because the communication between us and our higher selves becomes so limited, the soul, as it starts to integrate with the embryo, from the start of conception through gestation and the maturity of the embryo, starts to become isolated and starts to become more associated with its local environment, its body. And so by the time it's born, it's sort of lost its ability to communicate with what it really is. And so starts to create a temporary personality, an ego, that's body associated, rather than higher self associated or multiversally associated. And so that creates individuality, temporary individuality. And so we start to think of ourselves as that which we occupy, our local environment. And the more we're here, the more we become associated with it, the more we communicate with other individuals around us, the more that association becomes real, our reality. People say to us, we are our body. The body is limited. We're born, we live, we die, and that's it. And because we can't communicate with our higher self, we start to believe it because it comes from authority figures, our parents, our teachers, our leaders. And we become totally something we're not. However, in the background, there is just enough communicative ability to allow certain goals to be infused within us, our life plan, what we initially wanted to come here to experience. And so we have intuition, feelings, desires, wants to move in certain directions, to become certain things like doctors, lawyers, business owners, spiritual leaders, investigators, plumbers, carpenters, vagrants, priests. We experience all of these different things because that's the way we feel we go, or we allow ourselves to go into. So although we come with who we are, over time and over integration with the body, we become body associated, and the lack of communication with our higher self means that over time we forget. When we leave the body, it's like, that's who I am. And the personality that we generate, the ego, while we're here, becomes a very small part of what we are. Keep going, keep going. The thing that trips most people up is that we rise up the frequencies quite quickly. We do traversing the frequencies, which is the start point, not the end, it's the start point. So we have to keep practicing every day to continue to maintain our connection, because it's very easy to drop down the frequencies. It's much easier to drop down the frequencies than it is to rise up. It is significantly easier. But keep doing it. Don't worry about the days when you feel nothing is happening. Just keep doing it. Because although you're not seeing a climb or an improvement in your own progression, and it feels like you've plateaued, you've leveled out, actually you're creating a solid foundation. So that when you move up and you level out, you might feel you're going down a bit, but if you're keeping doing the work, you're creating a solid foundation that allow you to rise up later. So it's important to just keep doing it and and feel when the direction changes slightly as well. For instance, there may well come a point when you're a leader in your own right, even you're a spiritual or metaphysical leader in your own right, helping others to come from the ground level up to where you were. So it's important to recognize these changes within us, because these changes within us are our guidance that we're receiving from our higher self and also from our helpers who work with our guide, and they're the ones who are closer to us. So when we feel that, well, that's interesting, I must investigate that. That's because we're being given information from our guide's helpers and our higher self as well. I've received this many times. It's interesting when it happens because you just know. But also recognize that there may be times when your life changes like that. It goes completely upside down. And you wonder what's happened. You think, what have I done to deserve this? Stand back from those moments. Don't become attached to them. Don't judge them. Don't wonder why people are doing this or why maybe you've lost a job or a position. But look at it from a different perspective and say, well, is this a change that I need to make? Do I need to come out of this environment and go into this environment? And that's basically what happened to me. When I was working in the automotive industry, I had a plan to have a certain level of financial self-sufficiency, and that was there. And then other things were happening in the background that meant that I had the opportunity to leave earlier. And these things that were happening in the background were actually quite severe. And it was only later, I was having a conversation with a colleague, and it suddenly hit me. This is the time. And I did a quick mental calculation, and I thought, I was being too greedy. Yeah? I have enough. I wanted to be comfortable, but I have enough. And that was a turning point. And then within 3 months, I'd changed 100% to doing this work rather than it being a part-time hobby as part of my normal work. So it's observing the big changes that might happen and see them as a opportunity rather than something to be worried about or something to be concerned about or something that is going wrong in our lives. Everything happens for a reason. Even if it appears to be negative, there's a positive side to it. It's making us change our focus. So look for these things, yeah, and be be detached from the emotion associated with it, and try to understand them. Don't judge, just try to understand them, and you'll ride these crests of the waves, and what appears to be a blockage will become just moving around it.